You don't wake up. You're yanked out of sleep by the church bell, a rusty, shrieking thing that sounds less like salvation and more like a metal scream from hell. It's still dark, and you're already sweating inside your wool tunic that hasn't been washed since Michaelmas. You reach for a crust of bread that could be repurposed as a weapon, and then you hear it. A knock. No, pounding. 3 villagers, one holding a club, one holding a parchment, one holding a goat. You are hereby summoned, the one with the club declares, to face judgment for maleficium bovinum. What? Apparently your neighbor claims you gave his cow the evil eye. She hasn't given milk in 3 days. And your face, let's be honest, is suspicious. Welcome to court. Or rather, a clearing near the chapel where 3 elders, 2 of them probably drunk, sit behind a wooden plank decorated with dried herbs to ward off Satan's influence. You're not entitled to a lawyer. You're barely entitled to socks. And evidence? That's for future centuries. Here, truth is what the loudest man says, and justice is whatever doesn't anger God or the Baron. You plead your case, that you were in the woods gathering mushrooms, that you don't even like cows, that your eye just looks like that because of a childhood fever. But it doesn't matter. A witness, Marjorie the miller's wife, swears she saw you muttering near the cow shed. You were probably just swatting flies, but that's not what the villagers heard. Mumbles near livestock? Witchcraft. End of trial. The goat, for its part, has now defecated next to the judge's foot. A bad omen. Very bad. And yet, you're lucky. Today, they're lenient. You'll pay a fine, 1 chicken, 3 turnips, and a week of public humility, which means standing barefoot in front of the tavern with a wooden sign around your neck that says, "I offended Bessie the cow." Could be worse. You could have been stoned, or branded, or swum in the river to see if you float like a witch. In this system, guilt isn't proven. It's declared based on fear, gossip, or the moon's position. Medieval justice was a blend of divine paranoia and theatrical intimidation. You didn't need to commit a crime. You just needed to make people feel like you might. Had a dream about fire? Arsonist? Didn't cry at your aunt's funeral? Murderer? Have too many books? Heretic? Smile too much? Demonically possessed? Not smile enough? Probably plotting something. Sometimes they'd force you to carry a piece of hot iron across the courtyard. If your hand blistered, you were guilty. If it didn't, miracle, you were innocent. But let's be honest, your skin blistered either way, and so did your reputation. There was no presumption of innocence, no DNA, no logic. The system wasn't designed to find the truth. It was designed to restore order by making examples. You were judged not by what you did, but by what your existence threatened: crops, children, livestock, stability. And sometimes animals were tried right alongside you. That goat that defecated next to the judge, if he'd done it during Mass, he could have been whipped, or worse, excommunicated. Yes, that was a thing. We'll get there. Back in the village, your punishment begins. Kids throw pebbles. Old women make signs of the cross. And yet, there's something strangely comforting about it all. You're not alone. Everyone's scared. Everyone's watching everyone else. It's a system held together by suspicion and straw. You serve your sentence. You hand over your chicken and your turnips. And you hope, just hope, that the cow starts giving milk again. Otherwise, well, there's always trial by water. But we're just getting started. Because if you think this was absurd, wait until we get to the part where cheese decides your fate. You're still scraping goat pellets from your boots when the beetle reappears, clutching a wax-sealed writ and grinning the way men grin when they know the next spectacle involves someone else's neck. He marches you past the tavern, through a gauntlet of gossip, loose teeth and looser tongues, and deposits you on the low stone steps of the parish church. No oak-paneled courtroom here, just damp masonry, candle soot, and the smell of yesterday's incense mixing uneasily with barnyard sweat. Father Osmond waits beside a rough-hewn trestle table that appears to have been repurposed from a coffin lid. Upon it sits your judge and jury, a slab of rye bread black enough to eclipse hope, and a triangle of cheese so aged it clings to its own smell like a battlefield banner. Corsned, they call it. Holy lunch, divine lie detector. Swallow without stuttering, and God himself vouches for your innocence. Choke, sputter, or let a single crumb stray the wrong way, and everyone will agree that heaven has just rendered a guilty verdict. The gallows stands 2 fields away, close enough that you can see crows rehearsing their lines on the crossbeam. Osmond begins to chant, Latin rolling out of his mouth like warm pitch. He lashes the bread and cheese with holy water until droplets pool in the fissures and run across the wood in crooked rivers. Then he presses 3 tiny wafers of parchment, scraps of scripture, into the crust. You notice his hands shake a little. Perhaps he imagines what happens if God judges the right itself and finds him wanting. A hush settles. The villagers form a ragged semicircle, faces glowing in the dawn light like curious gargoyles. Someone coughs, someone giggles, somewhere a baby wails, as if rehearsing outcomes. Your own throat, traitorous, parched, feels lined with thistle. And you remember last night's supper? Nothing but salt pork and ale, both still staging a riot in your guts. Perfect conditions for disaster. Osmond raises the food like a relic, intoning the final words. Per judicium Dei, manifestatur veritas, then places bread and cheese into your trembling palm. They weigh no more than a sparrow, yet suddenly your arm aches as though you're holding millstones. You glance at the crowd. Little Alric grins, eyes shining with the thrill of public peril. Widow Edgith makes the sign of the cross so aggressively you fear she'll dislocate a shoulder. Old Reeve Godwin scratches his beard, probably recalculating fines in case your property becomes available by morning. There is no place to run. Even if you sprinted, they'd hunt you down, and flight would be its own confession. So you breathe once, catching a whiff of stone dust and sheep tallow, and bite. The crust is harder than penance. It lances your gums, and iron-tasting blood slicks your tongue. Next, cheese. Dry as chalk, yet somehow oily. It clings to the roof of your mouth like guilt itself. You chew. You pray without words. You feel each swallow scrape your throat. Time stretches. Your heart kicks so violently you expect your tunic to twitch. Around you, the world contracts to 3 sensations. The sour tang of curd, the rumble of breath through your nostrils, the pulse in your ears counting every heartbeat as potential doom. A swallow. Another. No cough. Yet. But your eyes sting, and you sense panic rising like hot iron in your chest. Don't think about crumbs. Don't think about rope. Don't think about that hollow thunk when a trapdoor drops. Behind you, someone gasps. A dog barks. A crow overhead croaks an opinion. Your tongue flicks a stray fleck of cheese from a molar. Dangerous maneuver. You wince, but no sound escapes. Seconds leak by. Finally, Osmond steps forward, peers into your watering eyes, and nods. A small nod, but the congregation exhales in unison, disappointment mingling with relief. You swallow once more, pure saliva, blessedly smooth, and feel your knees sag, lighter than reed stalks after a flood. The priest turns to the crowd. By God's grace, innocence is proven. His tone suggests surprise. Perhaps he'd rehearsed a more dramatic conclusion. Nonetheless, the verdict stands. A few villagers clap politely, as though a mediocre minstrelsy just ended, then drift toward the tavern to trade theories on why you survived. Some say miracles, others mutter that the bread was too small. One insists you sold your soul for a swallow's worth of mercy. Let them argue. You, still alive, taste the iron of your own blood and decide it's the sweetest thing you've ever known. But freedom is never free. Osmond reminds you that escaping the rope means paying the exchequer. 12 pennies for court costs, 1 sheep for church maintenance, and a promise to sponsor a candle-lit mass for St. Blaise, patron of throats. Ironic, but you don't laugh. Laughter might lodge the final crumb. You stagger outside. Morning sun slices through mist, painting the thatch roofs gold. Somewhere a smith's hammer rings, ordinary and glorious. You inhale, and the air no longer smells of dread, only wood smoke and wet earth. Yet even as you walk away, you hear whispers. Next time they'll use boiling water, and you know they're right. Medieval mercy is fleeting. The wheel of suspicion never stops creaking. One goat's bleat, one milkless cow, one unlucky sneeze during high mass, and you'll be back on those steps, mouthful of judgment. For tonight, though, you live. You will taste ale that isn't holy, bread that bends, cheese that forgives. And as you raise a mug in the tavern's dim light, you'll swear it lingers, a phantom dryness in your throat, reminding you that between life and death sometimes sits nothing more than a stale morsel and the collective superstition of your neighbors. Sleep lightly. Tomorrow we meet a defendant with bristles and a curly tail, because in this world, even a pig can find itself at the end of a noose. You're halfway through your first honest yawn of the morning when the church bell howls again. 2 quick strikes, the village code for blood on the ground. Folks spill from doorways clutching cloaks, pitchforks, tankards still half full. Curiosity is a stronger draft than ale. You follow the ripple of murmurs toward the commons and find the body. A child, no more than 3 summers old, lying limp in the mud beside a toppled barrel of apple mash. Above him stands the culprit, a sow the size of a hay cart, jaws pink frothing, snout smeared with something darker than cider. She blinks, stupidly serene, as if puzzled that breakfast has screamed. By dusk, the Baron's sergeants have trussed the animal like a knight's baggage, forelegs bound to a pole, hind legs chained, ears clipped for identification. They parade her through the high street so every soul can memorize those guilty bristles. You watch mothers yank children behind skirts, as though the sight alone might bite. The sow grunts once, low, confused, but the crowd hears confession in the sound and flinches as one creature. Trial is set for sunrise. Yes, an actual trial. Parchment indictments, a bench of elders, even an advocate appointed for the defense. Father Osmond, still smarting from yesterday's coarsened spectacle, has been drafted to plead the pig's case, because apparently his Latin impresses both God and livestock. He looks less than thrilled. Rumor says a condemned beast's soul can haunt its council eternally, squealing through midnight prayers. Dawn drags you back to the churchyard, more theater than temple today. The nave's windows glow with tapers, and the air tastes of damp stone, candle wax, and the faint metallic tang of fear. At the center lies a makeshift dock, rough planks lashed into a pen. The sow is hauled inside, chain clinking like irony's own chime, and the bailiff reads the charge, murder by mauling, with malicious intent. Osmond clears his throat, eyes darting between pig and populace. He cites St. Anthony and the inherent innocence of creatures without reason. He argues, hands trembling, that the barrel of fermenting mash was negligence by the brewer, that the sow was intoxicated beyond virtue or vice. The argument seems sound until the widow of the brewer rises, tears gleaming, and wails that spirits or no, the beast chose to gnaw her boy's throat. Her grief is a blade. It carves through rhetoric and leaves the pews raw. Now the prosecutor steps forward, brandishing precedent like a cudgel. He recites past sentences: the rooster burned for heralding dawn during Mass, the dog drowned for stealing holy wafers, the swarm of locusts excommunicated for eating Easter wheat. Against that litany, a drunk pig is easy pickings. The crowd nods, their need for order outweighing their sympathy for swine. You steal a glance at the sow. She's sunk onto her haunches, eyes half-lidded, drool threading from her jowls. Does she sense the stakes? Hard to tell. Pigs are inscrutable, half-wise, half-hungry. Yet something in her sluggish breathing claws at your gut. She is doomed, and she has no idea why. Verdict arrives before the sun clears the steeple. Guilty. Sentence: death by hanging, to be carried out before nightfall on the gibbet reserved for men, but suitable for beasts of comparable weight. The crowd exhales, part relief, part savage thrill. Children clamber onto barrels for a better view. Vendors appear as if conjured, hawking cider and roasted chestnuts, because justice, like grief, is easier to swallow with snacks. They march the sow to the outskirts, where the gallows creaks in a field of thistles. Ropes are doubled, beams reinforced. No one wants a botched execution haunting local legend. The executioner, a man who smells of onions and fatalism, slips a leather hood over the animal's face, more to comfort onlookers than the condemned. You expect struggle, but the sow merely grunts, exhausted, perhaps still drunk. A hush settles, broken only by the wind flapping the gibbet's black flag. The lever drops. The rope snaps taut. For a heartbeat, the sow hangs silent, heavy as guilt itself. Then a low, wet rattle escapes her throat, a sound so disturbingly human that Widow Edgith crosses herself twice. After a few shuddering kicks, the body stills. The crowd stands frozen, not cheering, not weeping, just staring as though they've glimpsed a mirror held by time. If a pig can face the noose, what truly protects a person? The Baron's clerk reads a final proclamation, her flesh deemed unclean, to be buried at the crossroads, so no Christian soil is defiled. A pit is dug hurriedly, the carcass rolls in with a sodden thump, earth thuds down like a judge's gavel. The breeze shifts, carrying the stink of death toward the village, and the watchers disperse, each pretending the odor belongs to someone else's conscience. You linger. The gibbet groans, ropes swaying like pendulums counting sins. You picture the child, the barrel, the startled squeal. Was malice truly present, or only hunger and chance? In this world, intent matters less than spectacle. Order must be seen to exist, even if it has to borrow a rope and invent a mind inside a pig's skull. Night falls. You lie awake on straw that scratches like accusation, ears filled with phantom squeals. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows, wolves yip at the moon, uncivilized but honest. You wonder how many creatures, two-legged or four, will dangle from beams before the century is done, and you promise, silently, to tread softly, speak meekly, keep your hungers hidden, for the boundary between human and beast is thinner than a butcher's blade. Sleep, if you can. Tomorrow brings new decrees, colors you must not wear, fabrics that declare your worth, and punishments woven as tight as the velvet they forbid. The sun creeps over the palisade, spilling honey gold light that can't quite sweeten the stench of chamber pots being emptied into the gutter. You stretch the knots from your spine, grateful, briefly, that at least today involves no cheese, no pigs, no rope. Then you remember the velvet ribbon hidden in your trunk. It was a trifle, really, a narrow strip the color of bruised grapes, scavenged from a merchant's scrap bundle. Purple. Not the deep imperial dye that costs a kingdom in crushed mollusks, but close enough to wink rebellion. You told yourself you'd stitch it inside your cloak where no one would see. But last night, ale in your veins and vanity whispering treason, you tied it round your wrist and admired how the candlelight kissed the fibers. You looked, dare you think it, almost important. Morning market is a river of elbows and intent. Steaming pies, muddy boots, clanging bells, gossip drifts thick as chimney smoke. You barter for onions, you haggle for salt, and with every reach of your arm, that purple ribbon peeks from your sleeve like a serpent's tongue. You notice heads turn, some curious, some calculating, and one, Reeve Godwin's, narrowing, hawk-sharp. He approaches with that measured stride officials reserve for coin counting and condemnation. "Fine morning," he says, but his eyes fix on the ribbon. "Where did you come by royal silk?" "Scrap," you shrug. "Paid 2 pennies?" "2 pennies?" he repeats, tasting the words like sour wine. Yet the sumptuary edict decrees that only those of noble lineage may display purple in public. A mark of sovereignty, not of peasants who smell of goats and onions. A small crowd bouquets around you, traders, children, a stray dog sniffing for dropped bread. You feel a trickle of sweat even though the air still carries winter's bite. Godwin lifts your wrist as though presenting evidence to invisible magistrates. The ribbon looks suddenly obscene, a bruise you've chosen to flaunt. He cites the penalty: first offense, forfeiture of garment, and a fine equal to 1 month's wages. Second offense, the stocks at noon. Third, prison or worse. Whatever worse means when rope is already spoken for by livestock and witches. You start to protest. Only a scrap, only vanity. But the law cares nothing for degree. Purple is purple, power is power, and you have trespassed. They strip the ribbon then and there. A woman gasps as the fabric tears. Even in ruin, the color glows like sunset on spilled wine. Godwin pockets it, a souvenir or evidence, or both. He announces you will stand in the pillory till the vesper bell, your wrists locked in oak so every passerby can ponder the danger of die. The pillory stands at the square's center, a timber yoke dark with the grease of past offenders. You're pushed forward, head and hands threaded through the rough holes, wood slamming shut with a thud that vibrates your teeth. The world tilts, cobbles rise, sky shrinks, and suddenly you are a display, part warning, part entertainment. Children toss rotten crab apples. One strikes your temple, juice stinging like mock tears. An old man spits, missing your cheek but not your dignity. Hours sludge past. You watch boots scuff earth. You count the flies on your nose. You name them saints to stay sane. Shadows lengthen. A minstrel stops to play a jaunty tune. Something about a knight who lost his trousers in a wager. People laugh, steal glances at your immobilized form, and move on. Your shoulders burn, fingers throb, throat parches. Purple, such a small temptation. Yet there's a peculiar clarity in punishment. Stripped of movement, you observe the village's hum with the detachment of a gargoyle, above judgment, yet carved from the same stone. When the vesper bell finally groans from the tower, Godwin reappears with a key and a ledger. He unlocks the stocks, notes your name beneath a column already crowded with offenses, 2 short hemlines, forbidden trims of fox fur, a hat that outfeathered its wearer's station. Fashion here is criminal geometry. Stitch beyond your class and the world rips you back to size. You flex numb fingers. Splinters stud your wrists like accidental jewels. Godwin reminds you of the fine, 30 pennies by Michaelmas, or your cloak becomes parish property. You nod, dazed, thinking of the meager coins hidden under loose floorboards and how your stomach already growls when supper is nothing but turnip gruel. Purple has a price. You pay in hunger. Night lowers over thatch roofs, a quilt of ash and ember. In your hut the fire sputters weakly, and you curl on straw, limbs aching, mind circling the same question. Why does color wield such terror? Because purple once draped emperors, because dye merchants swindled kings, because power must be visible to be believed. Clothe common shoulders in royal hues, and the illusion falters. Laws tighten to stitch the seam. You vow never to test those stitches again. Yet as you drift toward sleep, you recall the ribbon's shimmer, a whisper of agency, a daring breath. And you wonder, if a scrap of fabric can threaten a realm, perhaps the realm is stitched with fears more fragile than cloth. Dream lightly. Tomorrow beckons with new prohibitions. The wrong day to die, the wrong tone of laughter, the wrong stillness in your eyes. Somewhere a clerk sharpens quills to draft laws against silence itself. Best keep your voice ready, though heaven help you if it's too loud. You wake to the sour breath of dawn, and the news that old Sibylla, your neighbor, the one who smelled of rosemary and regret, has finally exhaled her last. You would think death grants a person a little peace. Not here, not this week. Not when the calendar insists today is the feast of Saint Wolfilda, a high holy day, ring-fenced by statute and superstition alike. The church bell tolls 5 solemn notes, then 5 more, one for each coin the parish will squeeze from Sibylla's sons for daring to let their mother die on a forbidden day. Across the lane, her cottage door stands ajar. Inside, the corpse waits, propped against the wall like a forgotten broom, because the bedstraw is reserved for the living. Her sons hover in the shadows, arguing in whispers. Bury now and risk a fine from the reeve, or wait and watch her bloom into something the flies will praise. You slip in to pay respects, though truth be told you're scouting for trouble. having learned it's better to spot absurdity before it bills you interest. The body is stiff, arms folded with the severity of a saint's reliquary. Her eyelids refuse to close. Rumor says that means an unpaid debt. But what really worries the sons is the parish mortuary fee, one best beast or its value in coin, payable to the priest for shepherding Sibylla's soul past customs. They own exactly one scrawny ewe with a limp and an attitude. If they surrender her, the family will be boiled cabbage away from starvation. A knock rattles the lintel. Enter Godwin, still smelling of your yesterday's shame, ledger tucked under his arm like a hungry fox. He cites the statute, chapter and verse, as if scripture were jealous of his memory. No corpse may be interred on a major feast without express license from the baron, which of course requires a sealing fee, which of course must be paid in advance. Also, until the paperwork clears, the deceased must remain displayed, in plain view, to deter rumor of foul play. Transparency, Godwin pronounces, as though the word itself is holy. Sibylla's sons stare at the dirt floor. Transparency looks a lot like public humiliation. The elder son offers the limp ewe. Godwin shakes his head. Beasts are only accepted if they can walk the length of the churchyard unaided. Rules are rules. Coin, then. They empty a purse, 7 pennies, 2 clipped so thin the king's face resembles a skull. Not enough. Godwin sighs, ink quill already thirsting. Each minute the corpse sits will incur a stasis levy, 1 farthing per hour. By dusk the debt will swell like bad dough. You help carry the body outside to fulfill the visibility decree, resting her on a door unhinged for the occasion. A crowd gathers faster than fleas, some crossing themselves, some calculating how long until their own parents cost them. The air tastes of wood smoke and mild panic. A child pokes Sibylla's ankle, expecting perhaps a miracle or a twitch. Nothing happens, which somehow feels worse. Mid-morning heat arrives, and with it, Father Osmond, who looks as though pastoral duty has been redefined as tax collection. He quotes another law. Every corpse must be escorted by 6 able men to consecrated ground, no more, no fewer, or else the burial is null and the soul floats homeless. 2 volunteers step forward, then retreat when they learn each bearer owes a pall fee, 3 farthings for the privilege of lifting. Osmond, ever pragmatic, suggests hiring drunkards at half price. The sons grimace. The dead deserve dignity, but dignity sits at the top shelf of this shop. Time slips. Noon sun puckers Sibylla's skin. Her smile tightens into an accusation. Flies convene. Someone mutters about miasma inviting plague. Panic flares. If she starts to rot in public, the reeve may impose a pestilence precaution, doubling every fine. You can almost hear coins screaming as they leave future pockets. Desperation births a plan. The younger son sprints to the manor with a jar of honey, an informal bribe sweet enough to oil a clerk's conscience. He returns winded, triumphant, a stamped writ waiving the feast day embargo for a charitable consideration. Cost, 2 jars of honey, a promise of 3 days' labor, and the ewe, limp or not, delivered for the baron's kitchen. The stave of law bends, but never breaks for free. Afternoon finds 6 neighbors, yourself included, gripping the doorboard like a makeshift bier. You march through streets lined with onlookers who evaluate your posture the way vintners sniff corks. At the lich gate, Osmond blocks the path. Final toll must be settled. The soul scot, 1 penny for every year Sibylla lived. 72. Gasps ripple. That's almost a soldier's annual pay. The sons count, come up short, and surrender the last heirloom, a pewter cup dented by decades of wedding toasts. Osmond weighs it, nods, pockets it in a purse already clinking. The grave yawns, shallow and hurried. Earth smells like iron and rain thirst. You lower the board, ropes squealing, body thumping into mud with a sound equal parts final and fiscal. The priest chants quick Latin, economy even in liturgy, sprinkles holy water as though rationing, and signals the gravedigger. soil patters down, muted applause for bureaucracy. When the mound is tamped, Godwin scratches totals on parchment, ceiling writ, viewing levy, Paul fee, Sol Scott, late day surcharge because the sun has begun to set. He presents the debt, 13 shillings, 4 pence. The sons blink as if struck. They will spend years repaying their mother's right to lie still. You walk home under a sky-bruised violet, thinking how death, once the ultimate escape, has been annexed by ledgers. Here, even a last breath drafts an invoice. You recall the limp you hobbling toward the manor, bleeding like a conscience nobody wants. Somewhere in the dark, a clerk tallies life itself in columns neat as gravestones, proving that in this village, breathing costs, but stopping costs more. Sleep with caution. Tonight you may dream of laughter, but remember, the law keeps a ledger for that too, and the ink never dries. You try not to smile these days. Smiles are risky, like walking with a lit torch through a hay barn. But tonight, in the smoky hush of the tavern, someone cracks a joke about the Baron's double chin wobbling like curdled custard in a thunderstorm. Ale sputters from your lips before you can swallow it back, and a treacherous bark of laughter jumps the fence of your teeth. Too loud, too bright, faces whip toward you, wide-eyed as shutters in a gale. Silence crashes down, heavy as the church door at midnight. Even the fire seems to dim, flames crouching low to avoid being witnesses. Across the room, Father Osmond, here for a consolatory tankard after Sibylla's funeral fiasco, stares over the rim of his cup, jaw rigid. He's not alone. The Reeve sits beside him, quill tucked behind one ear as though the man sleeps with ink. They exchange a glance, a silent writ of arrest written in eyebrow semaphore. Your stomach, already soured by penny-a-cup ale, sinks clear to your boots. The Reeve rises. No rush. Justice tastes better when allowed to steep. Regulative statute, he intones, voice oily smooth, prohibits unseemly mirth upon sacred days and in proximity to ordained clergy. He plants a heavy palm on your shoulder, friendly as a tombstone, and asks whether you find holiness amusing. You open your mouth, but the words tangle, nervous fish on a hook. Behind you, someone tries to stifle a giggle and turns it into a cough. The sound echoes like a last bell ringing. They haul you outside, cobbles glittering with frost. Air sharp as broken glass fills your lungs, and somewhere overhead a raven croaks, as if auditioning for profit. The Reeve lists the charges: irreverent laughter, disturbance of solemn fraternity, possible witchcraftal manifestation of uncontrollable mirth. He's proud of that last phrase. You can tell by the way his mustache twitches. Penalty ranges from a night in the stocks to flogging, depending on severity of cheerfulness. Severity of cheerfulness. They clamp you into the laughing stocks, a contraption seldom used because it must be, a pillory with a wooden gag pried between the jaws. If you so much as twitch your lips upward, splinters bite. If you relax and let your mouth slack, drool drips down your chin for children to mock. Either way, spectacle served. Villagers line up like pilgrims before a relic, eager to watch merriment crucified. Moonrise paints everything in bone colors: white breath, white frost, pale faces, and your dull wooden muzzle. A friar recites psalms at a safe distance, in case laughter proves contagious. He ends each verse with, "Memento risum mortem," remember laughter is death, though you suspect Latin grammar is not his strong suit. Hours pass. Feet go numb first, then fingers, then dignity. The gag's taste seeps into your tongue. Oak, iron, the ghost of every unfortunate who drooled before you. At some point, a group of boys arrive, armed with goose feathers. They tickle your ribs, expecting squeals. Nothing. They prod your armpits, searching for the hiccup of joy. Still nothing. Finally, one lad sticks the feather up your nose. You sneeze, hard, smacking your already swollen lips against wood. Blood trickles, warm and metallic, mixing with saliva in a tiny river of humiliation. The boys lose interest, Laughter, it seems, only entertains when it's yours. Just before dawn, the stocks creak open. Reeve Godwin unlocks the gag with a sigh of bureaucratic fatigue, as if paperwork wears heavier than chains. He announces a fine, 12 farthings for disturbing holy sobriety, payable within 3 days, or doubled at Pentecost. You nod, speechless, jaw too stiff for apologies. He adds, almost gently, "Consider your soul, friend. Excessive levity invites the devil." Then he trudges off, perhaps to calculate the exact weight of joy in coin. Back home, you collapse onto straw that still remembers yesterday's grief sweat. Lips split, muscles aching from forced stillness, you ponder the absurd arithmetic of sin. How laughter, so light it floats, ends weighed in silver and blood. You recall stories, nuns punished for giggling during matins, a minstrel whipped for clowning too close to Lent, entire villages warned that too much carnival would summon plague. In this world, mirth is gunpowder. Keep it dry, keep it hidden, strike it only when commanded by the hierarchy of frowns. Yet even as aches pulse through your jaw, an almost traitorous chuckle rises inside, small but stubborn, because somewhere deep down you know what the Reeve fears. Laughter is rebellion. It unbuttons fear, rattles chains, exposes pretenders in purple dye. One sharp cackle can shrink a tyrant faster than any blade. No wonder they tax it, gag it, decree it heresy. They understand its power better than you ever did. You spit pink saliva into the ashes of the hearth, feeling the ember of defiance glow hotter than pain. Fines can be paid, wounds can scab, but silence? Silence costs the soul. You vow, quietly, to keep a fragment of laughter hidden like contraband silk, stitched behind the lining of your sighs. Let the clerks measure chuckles in coffers. You will measure them in breaths still free. Sleep, if sleep comes, with bruised lips curved neither up nor down. Tomorrow brings another court summons, this time against a woman who said too little at her own trial. Best rest your voice. You might need it to testify that sometimes the loudest cry for mercy is the hush they try to bury it in. Dawn drips gray over the village green, soaking straw roofs and tempers alike. You shuffle toward the moot hall with a crowd that moves the way sheep do when they sense both wolf and shearer waiting. Today promises drama, a trial, they say, of a woman who refused to defend herself. Refused is generous. Rumor has her struck dumb after her husband's sudden death. Words locked behind grief the way monks bar cloister doors at dusk. In any sensible time, mourning would buy her quiet. But here, quiet is suspicious. The hall smells of damp wool and anticipation. At its center stands Edith Taylor's widow. Thin, rigid, eyes rimmed red, lips bloodless as linen. Around her, benches groan beneath gossiping neighbors. Father Osmond occupies the witness box, fingers knotted round a rosary so tight the beads squeak. Reeve Godwin presides with a ledger large enough to bury hope beneath parchment. You feel the air quicken, charged like cloth before a spark. The charge reads absurdly plain, contumacious silence in the face of lawful inquiry. Translation: Edith was questioned about her husband's demise. He collapsed in the dye house, lungs flooded with poison vapors, and answered with tears, not words. No confession, no explanation, merely the haunted hush of someone who's seen love fold in on itself. Yet the law demands speech, an oath, a denial, anything to prop the machinery of guilt or innocence. Without words, the gears grind metal on metal, and they blame the one who withholds the oil. Godwin calls witnesses. The miller swears he heard Edith mutter a curse the night before the death. The baker insists she prayed too little at Sunday Mass. A neighbor notes she kept shutters closed at noon, sure sign of plotting. When asked, Edith stares past them, pupils reflecting torchlight like two dark coins. Every silence is tallied as confirmation. Each unspoken rebuttal weighs heavier than any shouted defense. You feel shame prickle your skin, ashamed for the village, for the century, for a system that mistakes heartbreak for felony. At mid-morning, the court invokes its weapon of last resort, the dumb show test. Two bailiffs step forward with a board on which sins are painted in crude pictures: dagger, bottle of poison, sack of stolen bread, and at the bottom, a noose. Edith must point to her crime or to a blank space meaning innocence. The catch: choosing the blank is considered coy if done too swiftly, defiant if done too slowly, blasphemous if done with the left hand, mocking if done with too steady a gaze. It is a riddle where every answer is wrong. She lifts a trembling finger, hovers between images, then lowers her hand altogether. A collective hiss rises, like steam off a cauldron, followed by a cry of "Witch!" from the back. Godwin slams his staff. Verdict: guilty of obstinate silence, punished by tongue tethering. A leather thong passed through a hole in the pillory's beam, knotted to hold the mouth agape so passers-by may hear whatever words drip out, if any remain. A day and a night she will stand thus, jaw unhinged like a door to a house no one enters. They march her to the square. You follow, drawn by outrage you don't dare voice. The pillory yawns open, wood stained darker than yesterday's bruise on your lips. They fasten her wrists, then thread coarse leather around her tongue, pulling until it protrudes, helpless, a pink flag of surrender. The sight cleaves something inside you. Silence, once a private refuge, now displayed like contraband silk. Flies land, children jeer. A traveling juggler tosses apples, each thud against the beam, punctuating the farce. Hours seep by. Rain begins, a thin, needling drizzle that finds every collarbone, every splinter. Edith's hair clings to her cheeks. Water tracks down her exposed tongue, mixing with saliva, dripping in slow patters onto the mud. She makes no sound, cannot, but her eyes roam the crowd with a question none will answer. What would you speak if grief tore out your voice? People shift, uncomfortable. Even Godwin seems smaller, quill drooping like a wilted reed. At dusk, a bolt of lightning scribbles across the sky, thunder cracking straight above the square. Superstition ripples through the onlookers. A woman crosses herself twice. The juggler packs up without flair. They whisper of divine displeasure, of saints who mourn abused widows. Godwin mutters an order. Tongue tethering was to last till sunrise, but the storm, he claims, signals heavenly lenience. In truth, no one wants to risk a bolt striking bureaucracy's heart. They release Edith. She slumps, jaw swollen, tongue bleeding at the edges. Father Osmond drapes his cloak around her shoulders, and for once he speaks gently. "Come, child." She leans but does not weep. Even tears appear spent. The crowd disperses, boots squelching, guilt diluted by rain. You remain, watching rivulets wash straw and apple pulp into the gutter, carrying the day's cruelty toward the river like rubbish after a fair. On your walk home, silence feels alive, an animal you hold carefully lest it bite. You realize laws fear what they cannot catalog, sorrow too deep for language, mirth too wild for ledgers, thoughts that bloom between spoken lines. They hammer noise onto the voiceless and cork laughter in the cheeky, hoping to corral the unmeasurable. Yet between gag and tether, hush and howl, humanity persists, defying neat entries in Godwin's book. Sleep with mouth closed, but heart open. Tomorrow, rumor says, a parishioner fouled the air during High Mass, and the stench reached heaven quicker than prayer. The court is sharpening its sense of smell. Best breathe lightly. Sunday dawns clean and cold, the sort of sky-blue morning that makes you believe sin might go into hiding for a few hours. You file toward the stone-ribbed nave with the rest of the parish, fingers numb, breath ghosting. Inside, wax tapers hiss, incense plumes coil like tame dragons, and Father Osmond's voice booms in Latin that puddles across the flagstones. You stake your usual spot near the back, easy exit if holiness grows heavy, just behind Will Fletcher, a broad man whose diet is mostly beans boiled to sorrow. Halfway through the gospel reading, the miracle happens. A blunt, bubbling eruption escapes Will's posterior, loud, unmistakable, vibrato enough to rattle the leaded glass saints. For an instant the world pauses. Osmond's mouth hangs open in mid-verb. Choristers freeze with notes half-hatched. A dog lying by the door lifts its head in scandalized awe. Then the smell arrives, sulphurous, barnyard-rich, rolling up the nave like invisible fog. Shock spirals into uproar. Someone shrieks, "Demons!" A matron faints against a pillar. Children clap noses and giggle until mothers swat them silent. Osmond slams his missile shut, face pale as candle tallow. "Cease this sacrilege!" But the air itself seems possessed, thick with evidence of flesh's rebellion. Parishioners stampede for the porch, spilling into sunlight, clutching handkerchiefs and superstition. Will stands rooted, mortified into marble, swearing it was a cough from the bellows of his chest, not his backside. Few believe him, fewer care. Blasphemy has a scent, and it is clinging to his breeches. By Vespers, the story has sprouted antlers. Will's wind wasn't mere digestion, it was a malodorous omen. Some claim they heard a devil's growl in the burst. Others insist the stench singed the altar cloth. Godwin appears at Will's door with 2 deputies and an official writ. Indictment for polluting sacred atmosphere and inspiring panic among the faithful. Maximum penalty, public scourging, plus a tithe of beans banned from his household for a year, exile by legumes. Trial is called for the next morning under the south porch, that being open air enough to appease any remaining fumes. The onlookers swell, eager for justice, or at least a good whiff of drama. Will is shackled beside a cask of water to cleanse spiritual residue. A clerk reads witness statements. Matilda the spinner swears her pew shook as though an earthquake passed. Deacon Hubert claims he tasted brimstone on his tongue. Little Joan, eyes round as pennies, testifies that the stained-glass virgin winked, either in warning or disbelief. Will tries to speak, but each defense, beans, illness, nervous stomach, only deepens suspicion. Why would God choose such a vessel for thunderous prophecy unless the vessel were already half damned? Father Osmond proposes a test. The accused shall endure mass again, this time seated on a purgation stool, a tall, narrow seat drilled with holes, positioned in front of the congregation. If no wind issues during the service, innocence is assumed. Should another trumpet sound, guilt is certain and punishment immediate. Dawn of the test arrives damp and chilly, perfect weather for clenched guts. Will ascends the stool, cheeks pale, jaw clenched harder. The congregation waits, breaths bated. Mass begins. Kyrie, Gloria, Credo. Each prayer tightens the invisible noose. At the Sanctus, a murmur flutters through the crowd. Was that a squeak? No, only a creaking knee. Time crawls. Will trembles like a haystack in gale. Osmond raises the host. Silence thickens to near solid. And then, a whispering poot, soft but undeniable, slips into the sacred hush. Eyes widen. A baby begins to howl. Osmond's chalice clatters. Godwin strides forward, verdict blazing across his face. Will gulps, swears he shifted on the wood, swears it was the stool complaining. The smell, sadly, backs the prosecution. Sentence is swift. 30 lashes before the church door and a month's penance on water, bread, and peppermint leaves. The lash is wielded by the beadle, each crack punctuated by collective flinches, pain echoing beyond flesh into public conscience. Afterward, Will is slumped, back striped red, breath shallow. They douse him from the cask, chanting verses about purity. Water runs pink into the mud, thin incense for the crowd's moral nostrils. Beans become contraband overnight. Markets post notices. Legume Sabbath until further decree. Housewives grind peas underfoot to ward off gas devils. Children mock fart behind barns, daring demons to chase them. And Will? He shuffles through days, tasting iron and shame. a living parable that even the body's whisper can thunder into crime. Weeks later, rumors surface of a monk in Canterbury who sneezed during elevation and was fined only 2 pence. Some argue the village has overreached, others hush them, lest query smell like dissent. But at night, over low fires, laughter creeps back, muffled by palms, yet alive. Because everyone farts, everyone fears, everyone knows justice, this fragile reeks worse than any backside. You lie awake, stomach gurgling ominously, and wonder what other holes in the human shell the law might try to cork. A hiccup in the king's court? A sneeze during Lent? A yawn too near a relic? Sleep comes on a prayer that tomorrow your body keeps quiet. For the wind inside a man is older than statutes, and heaven help the clerk who tries to levy a tax on breath. Dream lightly, nose pinched, conscience clear. Next sunrise we return to the ovens, where bread too light can weigh on the soul heavier than stone. The rooster hasn't even finished its first insult to the dawn when a hammer storms against your door. "Baker's roll call!" shouts a voice that carries the sour tang of authority. You're no baker, but the village cares little for precision this morning. Everyone who owns an oven, or even a respectable fire, must present themselves. You pull on yesterday's hose, still stiff with rain and anxiety, and join the shivering procession toward the marketplace, flour dust trailing someone like guilty smoke. At the square, a table squats beneath a pair of iron scales tall as a child. Reeve Godwin stands beside them, flanked by a scribe and a barrel-chested bailiff whose knuckles are already white from clenching punishment fantasies. On the table, a single loaf stamped with the king's seal, perfectly rounded, crust the color of righteous sunrise. The standard. Around it, lesser loaves pile like nervous cousins at a royal banquet. Father Osmond, roped into service as moral referee, opens with scripture about honest weights and measures. His breath fogs in the chill, mingling with the steam of bread still warm from clandestine dawn ovens. You notice Will the farter standing far back, clutching a bundle of peppermint leaves like a talisman. The memory of scourging lingers in the hesitant set of his shoulders. Godwin lifts the first suspect loaf, Jonas the miller's, and places it upon the iron plate. The counterweight drops half a finger short. A collective hiss escapes the crowd. Jonas protests. The grain was damp, the wind wicked moisture away. The scales must be cursed. Godwin's quill scratches. Underloaf, 2 ounces light. Fine, 1 shilling, plus forfeiture. The bailiff confiscates a dozen of Jonas's best, tossing them into a wicker basket stamped bribery fund, where they land with hollow, incriminating thumps. Your neighbor Martha, wrists still stitched with pillory bruises from a velvet scandal of her own, steps forward next. Her loaf is weighed, a whisper of relief, perfect balance. She almost smiles, then remembers smiling is taxed in spirit if not in coin, and bows herself away. Your turn. You didn't bake, but the bloodless logic of bureaucracy shoves you into the queue. Yesterday you bartered for a rye round to stretch the week. Now it sits in your palm like a stone that might decide your fate. Onto the plate it goes. The counterweight hovers, wavers, drops. Light by a hair, no thicker than a priest's excuse, but law measures in absolutes today. Godwin's eyebrows rise, quill poised. Possession equals conspiracy, he recites, as if quoting a gospel footnote. Fine, a silver penny you don't have, plus public correction. The bailiff removes the loaf, pierces it with a hemp rope, and slips the rope over your neck so the bread hangs like a pendulum of shame against your chest. It's still warm enough to fog the cold air, mocking you with borrowed life. You think of arguing, I didn't bake it, I only bought it, but the clerk will say ignorance fattens no scales. Behind you the line squirms, fear smells faintly of yeast. Further along, a young apprentice tries to slip his loaf under his tunic. The bailiff spots the swelling cloth, hauls him forward, and slices the tunic open. Out tumbles a boule so small it could pass for communion. Laughter crackles, sharp, relieved, cruel. Punishment escalates. The boy must ride the tumbrel, a two-wheeled cart painted with lopsided loaves and the words, "Short wait, short life." He'll be paraded until dusk, jeered at by children who last week cheered a pig's hanging. But the spectacle everyone awaits stands ready by the pillory, the baker's crane, a stout wooden beam with pulley and rope, designed for those whose fraud exceeds mere coins. Rumor says a batch of soldiers fell ill after eating moldy trenchers, and the Baron wants a sacrifice sturdy enough to silence discontent. Jonas the miller's second loaf proves 9 ounces light, high treason against appetite. Sentence, suspension by wrists, loaf necklace added, until sunset or repentance, whichever greets him harder. The bailiff binds Jonas, hoists him, so toes barely graze the mud. 2 stale loaves are fastened around his neck, knocking his chin each time the wind nudges. Children toss pebbles. One lands, thunk, against a loaf, a drumbeat of ridicule. Jonas tries to lift his head, but the bread is an anchor made of hunger and law. You feel your own loaf cool against your sternum, growing heavier by the minute though physics says otherwise. Midday bells clang. The square reeks of vinegar and simmering hypocrisy. Vendors still sell pottage thicker with water than meat. Tailors cut corners on thread count. But bread, the staff of life, must stand pure or bleed its keeper. There is logic. Famine lurks one bad harvest away. Underweight loaves steal from stomachs already bargaining with emptiness. Yet watching Jonas sway, wrists purple, you sense greed masquerading as guardianship. Godwin's ledger gains weight faster than any loaf. Father Osmond circulates with a bucket of holy water, flicking droplets on the condemned bakers. Somewhere between mercy and bookkeeping, he seems lost. When he reaches you, he pauses. "A light loaf need not sink your soul," he whispers, almost kind. "Pay the fine. Break no more rules." You want to scream that fines breed hunger, and hunger will bake desperation again. But your voice is busy swallowing frost and shame. Shadows stretch long as underproofed dough. Jonas's head slumps. The bailiff lowers him enough to keep breath in his chest. Mercy or maintenance of spectacle? At last, the reeve declares the court satisfied for today. Fines are collected, coins scraped, cabbages surrendered, a brass candlestick exchanged for 2 ounces of civic forgiveness. Your last copper penny clinks into the box. The bread noose is cut, falls to the dirt, forgotten as soon as it lands. You cradle your reddened neck, lighter in both flesh and fortune. Night finds you gnawing a crust that passes muster only because no scales haunt your hovel. Each bite tastes of sawdust and suspicion. Outside, distant cries fade, the tumbril rolling home, the baker's groans dissolving into crickets. You imagine a world where bread weighs itself honest and bellies fill without audit, but such dreams rise like dough and collapse just as swiftly. Sleep on an empty stomach if you must. Tomorrow's docket includes architects of sin, those with too many windows inviting sunlight, and apparently licentious thoughts. Pray the moon keeps its gaze modest, lest they tax its light through the thatch. The inspector arrives at dawn, brandishing a tally stick like Moses come to count the commandments you've broken in timber and glass. You thought you were safe after the bread fiasco. Keep your head down, stomach flat, purse flatter. But sunlight, it seems, is the new heresy. 3 panes in your front wall, 2 tiny slits in the loft, and 1 glorious casement overlooking the dung heap. Altogether 6 eyes of temptation, each apparently luring Satan as surely as perfume lures flies. He starts with your neighbor's hovel, a mud and wattle cube lit only by the gap where the door doesn't fit. "Virtuous," he declares, scribbling 0 in soot on the lintel. Virtue smells like damp straw and rickets. Then he steps to your cottage. His shadow cuts across the yard, long and judgmental. Chickens scatter. You feel their solidarity. By decree of his lordship's morality council, he announces, each window in excess of 2 shall be subject to levy, 1 farthing per fortnight for the sake of public chastity. He taps the casement. The glass winks guilty rainbows. Luxurious, he snarls, as if the pain just burped in Latin. You open your mouth, to argue, to beg, but his quill is already carving fines into a wax tablet. Around you, neighbors gather, eyes bright with schadenfreude. They live in darkness. Your daylight looks like flagrant pride. Someone mutters that windows let wandering eyes spy wives at their toilette. Another swears extra pains cause feverish dreams. Superstition spreads faster than plague spores. You glimpse jealousy, lust, fear, all reflected in your own betraying glass. The inspector orders shutters nailed over the loft slits, lest the moon arouse unseemly urges. A carpenter appears, summoned by opportunistic magic, hammering boards until daylight shrieks and dies behind pine coffins. The sound echoes like nails in virtue's coffin, but whose virtue, yours or society's, is unclear. He moves to the casement, the best part of the house. From that sill, you've watched harvest moons, distant storms, the playful choreography of swallows. This one, he says, taxed double. It faces the road, flaunting comfort. His assistant hangs a wooden plaque from the lintel. Lux tax paid, with sin. It swings in the breeze like a dunce cap for architecture. Payment is due immediately. You produce the last coins you'd hidden beneath a floorboard, loose from too many restless nights. Copper clinks into his purse. Not enough. Collateral, he announces, eyes roaming. They choose your winter blanket, patchwork, but warm, and your iron cooking pot, justification being that broth drunk in too much light encourages gluttony. You stand, arms emptied of heat and soup, while the inspector's clerk scribbles receipts that mean nothing once ink dries. Father Osmond, trailing the procession like a reluctant odor, offers a prayer over the confiscated goods. Even he looks weary of consecrating every absurdity, but doctrine demands the appearance of holiness. He blesses the blanket, the pot, the very nails sealing your gloom. For a moment the Latin sounds like a lullaby for a dying sunbeam. When they leave, twilight has invaded early, thick as chimney soot. Indoors the air feels smaller, ceiling lower, walls tipped inward, as though the house itself is ashamed of your brazen need for daylight. The hearth flickers, sole survivor of illumination. Shadows multiply, breeding new shadows. You trip over a stool you could always see before. Bruise blossoms on shin, curses bloom on tongue. Welcome to righteousness. Night falls. You cannot read. Books require candles. Candles invite suspicion of secret scholarship. You cannot mend. Thread demands light gentler than fire's jitter. So you sit, listening to the creak of cooling beams, the tiny scurry of mice who navigate darkness better than their landlord now can. You realize how much thought rides on a single shaft of dawn, where to place a seedling, whether storm clouds threaten, the color of someone's smile. Strip that light away and the mind stoops, shoulders hunched, imagination shackled by gloom. Outside, a drunk sings off-key about maidens in meadows. The lyrics drift through slits they forgot to nail, carrying a whiff of freedom. You picture the inspector squeezing his own curtains shut, terrified of the moon catching him in a private grin. Perhaps he taxes because he envies, fear dressed in authority's cloak. In the morning you rise early, muscles aching from cold that blankets once held at bay. You stumble to the single legal slit and peel a knothole in the shutter with your thumbnail. Through that ragged peephole, dawn leaks in, thin, defiant. Dust motes dance, golden and irreverent. A rooster crows, oblivious to ordinances on volume. For a heartbeat you feel rebellious joy, light, unpaid for, slipping past bureaucracy like a thief. You chuckle, quietly, laughter still bruises, and you wonder how long a law can muzzle the sun before people remember the sky doesn't recognize ledgers. Taxes may board windows, but children will carve peepholes. Poets will write odes to cracks in walls. Lovers will meet where fences fail to cast shadows. Light is patient. It waits, then spills. You tuck that thought away like contraband silk behind your sighs. Because rumors already flutter, the Baron's clerk is drafting a surcharge on chimney smoke shaped indecently. Godwin polishes his quill. Father Osmond rehearses a blessing for soot. And you practice seeing in the dark, but keep an eye on that knothole where the dawn keeps promising, in silent syllables, that no board stays nailed forever. The summons comes at midnight, a parchment shoved beneath every door like a nightmare on crisp linen. All souls of sound limb and questionable conscience are required to attend the assize of Master Ulrich the Scribe, deceased. You rub sleep from your eyes, reread the line that matters, deceased, and taste iron. Ulrich, dead these 6 months and buried under 2 cubits of clay, apparently owes the law an explanation no living tongue could satisfy. Dawn stumbles in cold and wet, the sky the color of tarnished pewter. You follow a procession of lanterns toward the church, each flame flickering like doubt. Outside the porch, the gravedigger waits, clothes splattered with mud, the shade of secrets. On his cart lies a pine box roughly pried open. Inside, the corpse. Ulrich's skin hangs in gray folds, lips drawn back in a grin that is equal parts rigor and ridicule. Someone has tied his jaw shut with twine. Decorum or terror, hard to tell. His court attire, a once blue tunic now the tone of storm water, flutters limply in the wind, as though even the cloth remembers warmth and resents this parody. Father Osmond blesses the remains without meeting their gaze, muttering Latin that sounds resigned. Reeve Godwin, quill ever sharp, reads the indictment in a voice loud enough to wake saints. Forgery of testaments, misappropriation of tithe monies, an insult to the baronial dignity through seditious marginalia. The accusations curled through rumor while Ulrich still drew breath, but no verdict came before fever took him. Dead men, it seems, are easier to cross-examine. They interrupt no one. The corpse is hauled from the cart and sat upon a 3-legged stool in the nave, propped with stakes like a grotesque marionette. Candlelight paints hollows in his cheeks, makes his empty eye sockets gleam. A murmur swells from the pews. Revulsion, fascination, a pinch of glee. Justice promises spectacle. Spectacle never disappoints. The clerk calls witnesses. First the Baron's steward, a man who smells of ink and vinegar, waves brittle parchments, wills allegedly polished by Ulrich's sly quill, each leaving suspiciously generous bequests to anonymous charities that funneled coin back to the scribe's purse. He points at the corpse as though expecting confession to seep from its seams. Then comes Agatha the washerwoman, eyes rimmed scarlet, swearing Ulrich mocked the Baron's gout in notes squeezed between the lines of a homily, tiny drawings of swollen toes in clerical hats. The crowd titters. A bailiff pounds his staff for silence. Throughout, Ulrich says nothing, which the prosecution presents as further proof of guilt. His advocate, a young canon trembling in borrowed robes, attempts rebuttal, citing St. Augustine's mercy for the fallen. But each plea ricochets off Godwin's ledger like arrows off oak. Mercy is expensive, scandal, profitable. At midday, the court calls its final witness, the grave itself. 2 boys drag in a clod of cemetery earth and tip it at the corpse's feet. Flies rise like incense. See how the ground refuses him, bellows the steward. No honest man requires exhumation. Only the treacherous claw their way back for punishment. Logic as crooked as Ulrich's spine, but the assembly nods, hungry for closure plated with theatrics. Verdict, guilty on all counts. Sentence, symbolic mutilation. 3 fingers removed for every forged line, the right hand severed for theft, tongue sliced for slander, though God knows what tongue remains. And because justice must be seen grinning, the body to be reinterred in unconsecrated soil, face down, a stone slab atop the grave to prevent further appeal. Executioners step forward with cleavers that catch the sun. Wood chips fly as they hack through dead sinew. The sound is dull, like axes and rotten timber. Some spectators gag, others lean closer, cheeks flushed with thresholds breached. The severed hand thuds onto a pew, fingers curled as if still scripting mischief. A boy snatches it before anyone objects, souvenir or warning. You look away, bile crawling up your throat. The room smells of tallow, mold, and something sweeter, justice turning putrid. Osmond sprinkles holy water again, droplets sizzling on the cold flesh as though reluctant. The corpse, now lighter by extremities, is hoisted onto the cart. A rope slips. Ulrich's head lolls, jaw twine snapping. His mouth falls open in what might be a final laugh, or just gravity mocking all pretensions. Mothers usher children aside. The cart creaks toward the crossroads where suicides and strangers sleep. You trail behind, boots sinking in mud that remembers every hoof, every wheel. At the chosen ditch, they tip Ulrich in face first. Earth slaps him silent once more. Stones pile, one after another, like ledgers closing. When the last is set, Godwin signs his parchment with a flourish, ink black and proud. A breeze carries the scent of wet leaves, clearing the rot for a heartbeat, and you hear it. A collective exhale, justice served, village cleansed, ledger balanced. Yet as you turn away, a question needles under your ribs. If a corpse can stand trial, who among the living is ever safe from tomorrow's retroactive rage? The law has learned a new trick: punish memory. And memories, unlike bodies, never stay buried. That night, candle stub trembling on your table, you scratch these events into a scrap of parchment, half afraid the words themselves might one day indict you. Outside, wind rattles shutters meant to strangle moonlight. You imagine Ulrich's stone shifting, bones turning, parchment skittering across eternity in search of a signature that will never come. Sleep perhaps, but keep your deeds small and your penmanship modest. For at dawn, the Reeve posts a notice, a special inquest into modern oddities, those who talk to themselves, wear loose garments, or scribble too freely. Tomorrow the court plans to judge the living by laws of ghosts. And if history has taught anything, it is this: innocence weighs less than a feather, lighter even than a loaf, and the scales are never still. You wake in 2025, phone buzzing like a caffeinated gnat. You thumb scroll through doom, whisper to the ceiling, and, without thinking, voice type a grocery list while pacing the kitchen in pajama bottoms patterned with dinosaurs. Congratulations. In medieval court, you've just broken 3 laws before coffee. First, the pacing. In 1347, a solitary walker who muttered to invisible companions risked accusation of secret conjury. Words thrown at empty air were said to bruise angels. Judges prescribed a week in the stocks with your own shoes hung round your neck. Proof that feet and tongue should never plot in private. Your grocery soliloquy? Straight to the pillory, barefoot, so passers-by could spit homilies about humility between bites of underweight bread. Second, the pajamas. Loose linen dyed with whimsical lizards would scream sumptuary heresy. Reeve Godwin's quill would twitch at the unlicensed pigment, the frivolous cut, the indecent idea that bedtime garments exist at all. Night clothes then were yesterday's tunic, stiff, sour, repentant. Flaunting comfort after sundown implied sloth, and sloth invited demons. Sentence, dawn flogging, 1 stripe for every cartoon saurian grinning on your thighs. Third, the phone. A black mirror manifesting distant faces would have triggered the era's favorite reflex, maleficium by crystal. Glass that glows without candle or sun. Sorcery obvious enough to skip trial. Straight to water ordeal. Bound wrists tossed into the mill pond. Float, guilty, burnt, sink, innocent, drowned. Either way, your notifications finally silenced. Now imagine explaining your other daily tics. You absent-mindedly tap a rhythm on the table. Medieval neighbors hear forbidden drums, accuse you of rallying devils. You double-check the lock 3 times. Compulsive ritual, packed with spirits of thresholds. You post a sarcastic meme of a bishop breakdancing. Blasphemy, corporal or celestial, take your pick. You keep a houseplant collection, herbal familiars, clearly. Into the flames with the ficus. Neuroscience today names these quirks OCD, autistic stimming, generalized anxiety. The Middle Ages called them evidence. Courts loved behavior that didn't fit the village diagram of acceptable misery. Too quiet, too loud, too neat, too twitchy. Where modern medicine sees wiring, medieval law saw intent. And intent, once spotted, had to be punished theatrically enough to scare it back underground. Picture wandering into 13th century Market Square wearing Bluetooth earbuds, tiny black seeds in your ears. You must be harboring whispers from hell. They'd pluck them out, hold them to the magistrate's ear, hear only silence, and that silence, like Edith Taylor's widow, would testify louder than words. Punishment would likely mirror hers, tongue tethering, not for what you said, but for what the eerie seeds wouldn't say. Your smartwatch kills you twice. The glow after dark violates nocturnal curfew on flames, fire taxed, remember. And the pulse tracker implies you traffic in forbidden knowledge of inner humors. Physicians back then guessed at hearts by pressing wrists. Your device reads beats per minute. That's necromancy with extra steps. Ropes, rivers, torches, spin the wheel. Even kindness could trip you. Donate anonymously to relief funds. Secret generosity looked suspiciously like hiding ill-gotten coin. Medieval auditors would excavate your ledger, find no proof of wealth, conclude coin conjuration, and, echoing poor Ulrich, drag you to posthumous trial when your confused heirs couldn't explain the missing math. Strip away indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and the non-zero chance of therapy, and our era still carts around ancestral reflexes. We cancel suddenly, we dogpile publicly, we weaponize odorless digital farts. A rumor, a screenshot, a meme out of context, guilty until algorithm forgets. The tools changed, the thrill of spectacle persists. Godwin's ledger went cloud-based. The gallows traded creaking timber for trending hashtags. Yet there is mercy unknown to medieval dawns. You can apologize without swallowing cheese of judgment. You can laugh during Mass. It's called TikTok. You can bury loved ones without bribing barons for the privilege of grief. And if breakfast bread weighs light, you call customer service. No one strings loaves round your neck. The law still slips, greed still cosplays as morality, but you live in a century where sunlight through 6 panes is called natural lighting, not luxury incitement to lust. So tonight, when you tuck into a mattress 7 inches thick, each coil a hymn against back pain, whisper a toast to every ancestor who dangled, blistered, or gagged so you could scroll in peace. Be grateful for purple socks, for fart jokes unlashed, for windowed bedrooms and pharmaceuticals that calm the echoes in your skull. Grateful even for the restless insomnia that brought you to this tale. You're awake, alive, unburnt, unbanned, unexhumed. But keep a small ember of caution. Laws, like rumors, reincarnate. Somewhere a clerk sharpens a digital quill, drafting statutes about screen time or neural implants or laughter at the wrong emoji. Should absurdity try again, and it will, remember the lessons of bread nooses and goat trials. Solidarity tastes better than fear, mockery can be holy, and sunlight is a rebel, no shutter can cage forever. Now breathe, feel your lungs expand without tax, your thoughts wander without tether, your phone buzz with news that, mostly, won't land you in stocks. Close your eyes, thank the darkness for not being absolute, and drift towards sleep with one final silent giggle, contraband laughter smuggled across centuries of superstition. Let it glow like a secret pane of glass in the mind's cathedral, promising that morning light, unpaid and unweighted, will find you innocent again.